Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the 100 Proof News Hound, and we're here with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Today, we're going to be looking at anarchy in the USA. No, not that punk rock stuff from the 1970s. I mean that weird social political movement that began in the 1800s and continues with us to the present time. We're going to be looking at their deeds, and their deeds tended to be a bit nefarious. They were into political assassinations, bombings, robberies. They had a concept that they called propaganda of the deed, that the publicity associated even with their heinous crimes would bring attention to their cause and move their cause forward. I know that doesn't make any sense, but that's what they believed, so let's delve into it. The first thing we're going to do is let's get a dictionary definition of what anarchy is. Well, let's look here. Anarchy, the organization of society on the basis of voluntary cooperation, without political institutions or hierarchical government. So everybody's just supposed to get along. That ignores all the foundational precepts of human behavior that we've come to accept. That's why this is a utopian movement. Always distrust the utopian movements because, well, they tend to be utopian. Let's have a look at it. Let's have a look at what they stand for. You're really looking at what they stand against because they're really good at being against things, but they're not that good at being for stuff. They're anarchists. Well, they're anti-capitalist. They've been that since the beginning. They're anti-war, anti-globalization, anti-economic development. They tend to be really good at being against things, but not really good at putting in place practical, workable solutions to the problems that they're against. The movement begins in America around 1820. Between 1820 and 1840, you got something called the American Individualist Anarchism, kind of proto-socialism. An individual has the right to his tools and the product of his own labor. You know, that's that kind of stuff that sounds really good, but in practice, well, let's compare the anarchist socialist experiment with capitalism here for a moment here. Let's use a thought experiment. Each man, let's say at the time in 1820, every man can with his own power, cultivate 10 acres. Let's say that another individual develops a machine that allows him to cultivate 100 acres, be 10 times more productive. In exchange for this wonderful machine, the fellow who built the machine wants royalties equal to 1/10 of the new production. So he wants 10 acres of the product of 10 acres of land as a royalty on his machine. The worker, if you look at that, the worker who's now, well, he's now a capitalist, so the worker is now 9 times more productive than he was before. But here's the problem that the anarchists and the social anarchists have, is that the fellow who developed the machine is now, if he built 1,000 machines, is now 1,000 times wealthier than the farmer. The anarchists would consider the farmer worker to be oppressed, even though his income has risen 9 times. He's 9 times wealthier than he was before, but he's the oppressed. The anarchist view on that situation would be to confiscate the wealth of the entrepreneur and distribute that evenly amongst the poor. The solution for a capitalist in this situation would be to make an even better machine that would allow every farmer to farm 200 acres. There's our basic tension, the tension between distribution and production. And that's why that in capitalist countries today, you've got skilled tradesmen who live in 4,000 square foot houses, have 3 cars and a boat, and skilled tradesmen in socialist countries, well, no, most of them have dust. Well, how do these divergent views present themselves in the history of the United States? What deeds did the anarchists seek to undertake that would bring notoriety to their cause? Well, they get a good head start in the 1880s. First place we're going to go to, and in our little talk today, we're going to go to 4 or 5 different places just to highlight what the anarchists have been all about. 1886, Chicago. On May the 3rd, there's a riot at the McCormick Harvesting Machine Company. It was a labor protest. Police are called, shots are fired, and 2 demonstrators are killed, and dozens of policemen and other demonstrators are injured. So what would you do the next day? Let's ramp it up. And so instead of having a few hundred people there, let's have 1,000 people at a rally the next day, and let's bring 100 cops to the party and see what happens. So they do that to the corner of Haymarket Square in Chicago, and what follows is known as the Haymarket Square riot. There's 1,000 protesters. There's 100 police. The police are trying to clear the square. Out of nowhere, where, but from the protester side, someone throws a bomb in. And I mean an actual bomb, like a Natasha and Boris Bullwinkle kind of bomb, Snidely Whiplash kind of bomb, circular metal bomb with a fuse. Just classic, right out of the silent films. It goes off, and then all hell breaks loose. Everyone is armed on both sides. Hundreds of rounds are exchanged, and it results in the death of 7 police officers, 4 civilians, and the wounding of literally scores of people. It is a disaster. Nobody knows who throws the bomb, but that doesn't stop the police from making arrests. And they do, in fact, end up arresting 8 people. Here we have the Chicago Tribune article, Wednesday, May 5th. A hellish deed, dynamite bomb thrown into crowd of policemen. It explodes and covers the street with dead and mutilated officers. A storm of bullets follows. The police return fire and wound a number of rioters. Harrowing scene at the Des Plaines police station, a night of terror. And then it goes on to describe how the dynamite bomb was thrown and the individuals that are hurt, and they got the listing of basically 100 people that are injured. This is all new stuff. Socialism is just getting a foothold in England. It hasn't gotten a foothold at all here in the United States up until this point in time. So the public has to sort of be educated with respect to what is anarchism, what is socialism. And there's a real dispute here. The socialists don't want to be painted with the anarchist brush because anarchists tend to be crazy even by socialist standards. So the paper tries to explain it. And the article is, what is socialism? It says, since the assassination of the policeman in Haymarket Square, the leading communists of Chicago, and we're throwing that term in now as being ultra-socialist, and their political patrons have been at great pains to distinguish between socialism and anarchism. They say just now that the socialists only hope by means of peaceful agitation and the ballot to subvert the existing order of things and overthrow the right of property and suppress personal liberty. In other words, they are for peaceful anarchy. So the socialists and communists are for peaceful anarchy, but the anarchists aren't buying it because they say the socialists, not anarchists, it will be remembered, have declared the irreconcilable conflict between capital and labor, set up a genuine labor movement, and roused the proletariat to arm themselves and get ready for the coming revolution, when the parasites will be destroyed like vermin, and the workers will get the full results of their labor, and no upper class will be able to lord over it as a pauperized mass. That doesn't sound very conciliatory either. At best, somebody wants to peacefully or violently overthrow the existing order. But the courts are having none of it. What happens here? Chicago Tribune, Saturday, August 21, 1886. And remember, in the 19th century, justice moves very swiftly. We're talking here just 5 months later, the trial has occurred and the sentences have been passed. 7 dangling nooses for the dynamite fiends. The anarchist trial came to an end yesterday. 7 of the prisoners were sentenced to death, and the 8th to 15 years in the penitentiary. And then they go through the individual verdicts. Justice is done swiftly in 19th century America. Well, moving forward 15 years, we've got another anarchist on the loose doing some anarchistic things. Fellow by the name of Leon Czolgosz. You never heard of Leon Czolgosz? He should be as familiar to you as John Wilkes Booth. He's the man responsible for the assassination of William McKinley. Now, this Czolgosz fellow is of Polish extract, and he's born in 1873 in Detroit, Michigan. He has a normal childhood. I mean, there's always a tendency to look for some terrible traumatic thing in murderers' background stuff. This guy's got an absolutely normal upbringing. His dad works in a factory. He drops out of school at 16. He starts working in a factory. He works at a variety of jobs. He ends up at the age of 20 in a rolling mill, steelworks, where he's laid off, but then chooses never to go back to work again and becomes a socio-anarchist. I didn't know that was a profession, but apparently it is, and that's what he does. He runs into some of the leading anarchists of the day, and they point him in the right direction, at least the right direction to become a classic anarchist. But this fellow is such an oddball, and I mean that in the best possible way. He's such an oddball that even the anarchists don't trust him. They actually think that he's a government plant, because here's a little article that was put in one of the leading local anarchist rags here. It says, attention. The attention of the comrades is called to another spy. He is well dressed, of medium height, rather narrow shoulders, blonde, and about 25 years of age. Up to the present, he has made his appearance in Chicago and Cleveland. In the former place, he remained but a short time, while in Cleveland he disappeared when the comrades had confirmed themselves of his identity and were on the point of exposing him. Again, they think that he's a spy. He's not. He's just nuts. His demeanor is of the usual sort, pretending to be greatly interested in the cause, asking for names or soliciting aid for acts of contemplated violence. If this same individual makes his appearance elsewhere, the comrades are warned in advance and can act accordingly. So the word's out. Don't cooperate. Don't cooperate with Leon Czolgosz. The assassination of McKinley's a crime of opportunity. William McKinley's going on a tour. He's going to be in Buffalo, New York, at the Pan American Exposition. He's going to be meeting the public. And back then, they would meet the public. Go back to what you know about Abraham Lincoln. He would have 100 guys. He'd meet 100 guys in the White House, job seekers or whatever. They would just come. If you wanted to talk to the president, just show up, knock on the door, and eventually you'd get in. So he's in a receiving line. He goes to shake Czolgosz's hands. Czolgosz pulls out a .32 revolver, knocks McKinley's hands away, and fires 2 shots. First shot bounces off a steel button on McKinley's coat, and it doesn't enter. The second one, though, enters and lodges in his stomach. It's not a fatal wound. This is a thing that should have been able to be operated on and easily removed. However, when a bullet goes in through material, it drags in that material into the wound. This is pre-antibiotic American, as I've said so many times in our tales here, that you can die of almost anything in pre-antibiotic America, and the wound becomes infected, and 9 days later, McKinley dies of the poisoning. Now, what did the newspapers think of Czolgosz? Did they know of his motives? Here's the article from the next day. McKinley shot by an anarchist. They knew that right away. Leon Czolgosz, who calls himself Fred Neiman, and that's the only time I've had him referred to as Fred Neiman, attempts to kill the president. One bullet entered stomach. At 3 o'clock this morning, Mr. McKinley was resting well and in no pain. He hopes for a recovery. It says deed done at a public reception. And this is what a good guy McKinley was. Crowds try to reach the assassin. The president's word saves him from lynching. Well, nothing saved McKinley, and McKinley would die. But he would be tried. The trial and execution. Remember, we're looking at a crime that took place a crime that took place on September 7th. And by October 29th, he's tried and executed. We've got a lovely photograph here. Hopefully you have it on your screen right now of Czolgosz in jail prior to his execution. So the anarchists, I don't know why they were so gung-ho about this deed of propaganda of the deed thing. They do get publicity, but it's all negative. And I know there's there's that old maxim that any publicity, including bad publicity, is good publicity. But no one's movement is being forwarded by these things. At least no one rational. Which brings us down the road. We're going to move down the road about 18 years to 1919. I could have stopped at any year. There were bombings. You just don't realize there were bombings and murders and robberies to fund the movement every year. But 1919, it spiked. 1919 was borderline crazy. Here we go. Here's an article in the Evening Public Ledger, Philadelphia, January 1, 1919. Bomb found in booth at post office. Infernal machine near offices of Kane, U.S. Marshal. List of intended victims discovered. It says here a 4th bomb has been found in the investigation of the terrorist bombing outrages. It was discovered in a telephone booth on the 3rd floor of the Federal Building, 9th and Chestnut Streets. The bomb failed to explode. And how did they know that it was an anarchist bomb? Well, the phone booth was full of anarchist written materials. They leaving copies of their propaganda in the telephone booth. But that was not a lone wolf kind of thing. There were dozens of bombs bombs and bombings in 1919. Here's another one from January 1, 1919, the Nevada State Journal. Arrests made in connection with Chicago bomb outrage. Authorities look into activities of draft opponents and group of anarchists. The anarchists remember they're anti-war, they're peaceniks, as it were. They're anti the draft, but they're also just dyed-in-the-wool anarchists. Now, again, January 1, 1919, absolutely looking at a different bombing. This is the Tucson Citizen. Anarchist bombs blast residence of 3 leading Philadelphians. Then this is all in the first day of the year. Infernal machines are set up at homes of judge, police superintendent, and Chamber of Commerce head in Philadelphia. The bombings would continue and would ramp up until April, May, and June. In April, May, and June, there were at least 36 bombings. And the bombings took place all across the United States, and they were targeted to prominent individuals. Just give you an example of who was subject to a bomb attack in 1919. Oliver Wendell Holmes, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. J.P. Morgan, of course, noted capitalist. John D. Rockefeller, even more noted capitalist. A. Mitchell Palmer, and we'll get a picture of his house that blew up. He's the Attorney General of the United States. They blew the front end off his house. They even tried to kill Kennesaw Mountain Landis, at the time just a district judge in Chicago, but within a couple of years, he was famous because they brought him in. He's Mr. Fair. They brought him in with respect to the White Sox scandal, the 1919 throwing of the World Series, and he would eventually become the first commissioner of Major League Baseball. So they tried to blow him up too. Article in the New York Tribune, Thursday, May 1st, 1919. Vast bomb plot may lead to nationwide roundup of Reds. 22 more bombs found in mail, 16 in New York City. 16 in the New York City area, bombing. And the bombings these were classic bombs, Ted Kaczynski kind of bombs. They're TNT in a cardboard box wrapped in brown paper with just the address of the intended victim on it. And a timer, and a timer fuse. The New York Tribune on June 4th, 1919, has an article headlined "The Trail of the Terrorist Bombs." And in there, they show the photographs of three of the bomb sites. One was the rectory of the Church of Our Lady of Victory. They were trying to blow up a bishop. The second picture is Mitchell Palmer's house. Remember, the Attorney General. He was actually known for leading the charge to arrest and deport anarchists, so he was an obvious target here. And the third one is a New York bombing. The third photograph is the home of Judge Clark. It's at 151 61st Street East. We said the propaganda of the deed. I don't know how that carries weight in anarchist circles, but the public certainly had no time for it. Daily News, New York, October 30th, 1919. No mercy for bomb plotters. There was a huge. What you have to realize. You think we have troubles with immigration now. There was a huge foreigner immigrant component to the anarchists and socialists of the day. Most, not all, but certainly most were either first generation or were fresh off the boat, as it were. Remember, this is the first round up until the mid-1920s. This is the first round of sort of unlimited immigration. And here we go. No mercy for the bomb plotters. The arrest of several and the discovery of a quality of explosive in Cleveland bids fair to let a little daylight into the bomb mystery that puzzled the police in May or June. Two of the men arrested bear Russian names. The other has yet to be identified, but is obviously a foreign-born agitator. It says here, well, remember, we got the Constitution. Of course, the guilt of these prisoners is yet to be established, but whoever or whatever they are, public opinion will sustain any sentence, however heavy, that may be passed on them if they are found guilty. There can be no toleration of anarchy or of any of the methods of anarchy in this country. There can be no toleration of foreigners who come here with the idea of establishing the kind of government that they have tried in vain to establish in the countries which have expelled them. Don't bring your stuff here. Men and women of foreign birth who come to this country to abide by its laws and to become American citizens are welcome. But for the agitator, the troublemaker, the anarchist, and the bomb plotter, we have no place save behind the bars of our penitentiaries. I guess that succinctly summarizes the official position with respect to foreign-born anarchists. There's a nice photograph here in the Daily News, November 10th, 1919, of, well, it's self-explanatory. 31 alleged radicals were taken in the government raids on the Soviet headquarters in Newark. They're using Soviet in the communist sense of it. So there's a Soviet in Newark the raids were conducted simultaneous with others all over the country. Some of them admitted to being anarchists and said they were proud of it. So there, anarchists run amok in 1919, scores of bombings, dozens of injuries, public reaction, extreme public reaction. They're probably going to round up many more foreign nationals than were actually participants in the anarchist plots. But at that point in time, I don't think anybody really cared. And that leads us to the biggest bombing of all. And what's frustrating about this bombing is that no one was ever brought to justice for it. But it no doubt is part of the anarchist plot. It occurs September 16th, 1920, 12:01 p.m. on Wall Street, New York, right in front of J.P. Morgan and Company's offices. It couldn't be. It's the exact center of capitalism. And what it was a horse-drawn carriage containing 100 pounds of dynamite and 500 pounds of sash weights. Sash weights have old-fashioned double-hung windows like we have here at Leslie Manor. Each of those has a sash a counterweight, and the counterweights can weigh anywhere between 5 and 15 pounds, depending on the size of the window. So what they have here is 100 pounds of dynamite, 500 pounds of satchel weights. What he's done here is he's built himself a 600-pound grenade that he sets off at 12:01, instantly vaporizing the wagon and the horse. The driver, however, was seen getting away moments before and going up a side street. Results in 38 deaths and 70 million or so in today's money in property damage. Here's the article from the New York Times, Friday, September 17th, 1920. Wall Street explosion kills 30, injures 300. Morgan office hit. Bomb pieces found. Havoc wrought in Morgan offices. Well, you'd think so. Red plot seen in blast. They don't know whether, it could be socialists, it could be anarchists, it could be communists, but the anarchists tend to be the most violent, and so they're going to get the blame on this here. New York Herald, Friday, September 17th, 1920. Beautiful photographs here. Scenes just after the big blast which strewed Wall Street with wreckage and victims. Bomb plot, not an accident, says officials. What's interesting, there in the inquiry, there actually were people, but there were some participants who felt it may have been an accident. I don't know how you accidentally build the world's largest grenade and set it off at noon in front of J.P. Morgan's offices, how that's an accident, but some held to the proposition that it was. It says Morgan home is protected by picked men. They don't know whether this is the beginning or the end of the anarchist bombing. So J.P. Morgan, of course, has private security around his house. They list the dead and missing. Most of them are just young clerks, stenographers and clerks on Wall Street who have just gone out at 12:01. They've just gone out for their lunch break, and they're mowed down as if they're on the front lines of the Somme. The bombings really simulated renewed efforts by police and federal investigators to track the activities and movements of foreign radicals. That's where the ire of the public was directed. The ingratitude of coming to the country and doing things like this. They never did find out who was responsible, but the entity that if there were Vegas odds back then, the entity would have been on the impetus would have been to name Luigi Galliani and his followers. They're called Gallianists, a very particular kind of high-pressure anarchists, and Galliani would be responsible for many crimes, bombings, robberies, to fund the movement between 1914 and 1932. And two of the Galliani's, his followers, were, if you were going to bet on any individuals who were, if not solely responsible, certainly but participants in the Wall Street bombing, it would have been Bartolomeo Vanzetti and Nicholas Sacco. Sacco and Vanzetti. They were part of the Galliani. If they weren't participants in the bombing, they no doubt knew who were. Their story would come to an end. Well, it would come to a beginning of the end next year in 1921 when they're arrested and charged. Well, here we have the New York Daily News, Friday, July 15th, 1921. Alleged radicals found guilty of double killing. Nicholas Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, alleged radicals on trial here for the murders of paymaster Frederick Parmenter and special officer Alessandro Baradelli in an $18,000 payroll robbery. Now, $18,000, I love doing these conversions, it's $540,000. The robbery was at South Baintree, April 15th, 1920, were found guilty of murder in the first degree tonight. And after many appeals and up to the Supreme Court and having all kinds of followers, they became quasi-criminal celebrities in the 1920s. We've seen that happen again recently. So anyways, but didn't do them any good. Eventually they're executed. And it brings to an end, that portion of the high-profile violence associated with the anarchist movement. The anarchist movement wasn't dead, though. It would maintain its position and come back in the 1960s. If you think of the counterculture movement in the 1960s, the yippies, the Weather Underground, the bombings associated with that, the bombings performed by people who would later go on to become notable university professors, all of that sort of thing is pure anarchism. It's got all the hallmarks of anarchism. Noam Chomsky, the noted linguist, he's a self-described anarcho, and this takes a little bit of work to break down. An anarcho-syndicalist believes that there should be no associations higher than a trade union. So you can organize, a few guys could have a card game, but and that'd be an organization, but you could also organize yourself into a trade union to unionize your shop. But there shouldn't be anything above that. So that means no municipal government, no state governments, no federal governments, nothing else above that. back to the original definition of anarchists, where, oh, my fire's popping. Back to the original definition of anarchists, where basically you're just to have control over your own tools and the product of your own work. Utopian solutions to real-world problems. In the last few years, we've seen, if anything, a ramping up of anarchism here. If you look at the Occupy Wall Street movement, was a classic anarchist thing, anti-capitalism, the Black Lives Matter, the George Floyd, the movement, many of the actions taken by movement leaders with respect to the protests were classic anarchism. And there's even been a couple more. In January 2023, Atlanta police shot and killed Echo anarchist Manuel Esteban Paez Terran as part of the Stop Cop City protest. That was the defund the police thing in Atlanta. They were going to build a police facility, and they were of course the defund the police people opposed it, and he ended up being killed. And in February 2024, an anarchist and U.S. Air Force serviceman Aaron Bushnell self-immolated, set himself on fire. Remember that one? Outside the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. Classic anarchist actions. So the anarchists are here. I don't think the anarchists are going anywhere. There's always a small percentage of the population that romanticizes violence. You see it. You see it being acted out today. Whether that's 10% or 20%, they're there. They're always going to take that route. Maybe AI will have some cure for this, but certainly at this point in time, we don't. Anarchism is still boiling just below the surface, and at the least opportunity will raise its head, as we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years. So we spent 100 years with anarchists. If I ever needed a cocktail, it's right now. And of course, there is an anarchist cocktail. It's a whiskey cocktail. We're going to start off here with 1 shot of rye whiskey and a half a shot of chestnut syrup Torani. So a chestnut liqueur. You're going to have 2 shots of soda water. You're going to put ice in a mixing glass. Then you're going to add all of those ingredients. You're going to stir. Then you're going to pour into a highball glass and fill the remainder of the glass with ice. You're going to garnish with a roasted chestnut. There is no better. You think about that drink. There's no better November cocktail than an anarchist. So make yourself an anarchist, but try to avoid the anarchist movement. Now remember, like and subscribe. It's very important to the development of the station. We really appreciate your subscription and your likes. So take care. We'll be back in a week or so with a new episode of some fascinating portion of the past. Take care, everybody.